Hello there, it's Simuzaja Kalua from Code and Parallel. If you're looking for a place to learn .NET, more especially C#, without prior experience, very beginner friendly and straight to the point, then you have come at the right place. You see, on this channel I show you easy ways on how you can build enterprise level applications, on how you can implement that next idea you've been thinking about without wasting your time, money, or effort. You see, I understand the frustrations that come with learning a new technology. Trust me, I've been there. The frustrations, the long hours, the sleepless nights, the knowledge gaps, a lot of content with little value. But see, that ends today, because in this video series, I'm going to teach you how to implement a clean architecture from scratch. And throughout the course, we're going to add concepts one on top of the other. And once we're done, you, my friend, are going to become a clean architecture expert. So if you're interested, follow me on this journey as we discuss what clean architecture is, and then we actually implement it in code, step by step. All right, so here we are in Visual Studio 2022. Instead of us going through an entire presentation, the best way is to show you by doing. So we're going to create a couple applications that conform to the clean architecture pattern. So first of all, create a new project. And we're going to have about 5 projects instead of the normal 1 project which has everything. So first of all, we're going to create a class library. So select class library. Should be C#. Click next. And we have been building something on a movie API, but using the other ways of doing it. So we're going to do it here as well. I'm going to put the link in the description of that series so that maybe you can go at your own free time and differentiate. So this is a movie library. I want you to call clean movie. Call it domain. Hit next. So we're going to use the .NET 6 framework. We might do for the 7 one later. So then click create. Now your first question could be, why do we need a domain? Okay, and that's a very important question. So what is a domain? What is a domain project? Or what is a domain in a clean architecture? What is a domain in a clean architecture? In a clean architecture design? That's a good question. So domain is the things that you have in an application that are domain specific. So what do you mean by domain? We're building here an API. It's a movie management, not API rather. We're building here a system. It's a movie management system. So I want you to think of domain as the things you do with or without having a software. All right. So think of a scenario by you have a movie rental system or a movie rental system. Now remove the aspect of having a software. Think of it as a manual process. What happens? You're going to walk into a movie rental shop. You're going to ask them, can I see all your movies? So they're going to they're going to bring out rather a book or whatever they use, a ledger. Then they'll show you, these are the movies that we have currently. Then on those movies, you are going to select the movie that you want, right? And once you select, they're going to take your details, they're going to put that down, and then they're going to give you the movie, and then you go away. So this is the domain problem. If you go to another movie rental, the process would still be similar. It would be the same. That's a domain concern. So domain are these things that you can do with or without software. All right. So whatever will be in this domain class will be those things that could exist in any movie management application. So even if you go to another city, the concept will still be the same. So that's where the concept of domain comes into play in clean architecture. So whatever is common to the domain has to be in one place. And we're gonna bring in multiple projects into this solution. But I want you to remember one thing, that a domain does not depend on any other project. All right. So in our concept, in our context, what do you think could be? So I'm going to delete the class. What do you think should be in this domain? So to keep things simple, I'm going to add a class of movie. Okay. And we're going to go in a couple of videos and look at how we can extend this. But for now, I just want you to understand the architecture. So create a class called movie. We're going to keep it at a very bare minimum. Okay, so make that public. All right, just give it an ID. Could have a name, so string movie name, and then we could have for you to borrow that movie, there has to be a cost attached to it. All right. Okay. So we're saying at our core domain, every system is going to have this class, whether in a system that's using software or not. There will be something to do with a movie. So that's a domain problem. Okay. Good. Now we're going to add the next project. We're going to call it application. So it's going to be clean movie.application. So right click on the solution, add project. You're going to add another class library, and you're going to call this clean movie.application. And you might be asking now, I'm also going to delete the class. You might be asking now, all right, so what's an application? Now, an application is the project, is the layer where you're going to have your business logic. So this is how you are going to implement your business logic. Okay, so this is now unique to your application, because the way you would want to rent your movies could be different with another shop. So one could use a ledger, one could use an Excel sheet, somebody could use a Word document, somebody could use a hard copy document. But at the domain level, they are all the same rental process, which is similar across all these things. But how you apply those things becomes different. Okay, so application layer in this context, it is that layer that dictates how the business logic of an application should be. And the application layer depends only on the domain layer. And it kind of makes sense because you're trying to implement that domain, that activity with specific application logic. All right. So in this case, we want to give out movies. It means the application logic will ask questions like, so what do you want to implement? So we're going to say, let's say you walk into a shop, you're going to ask to see all the movies, right? That's the only use case we're going to use in this video. So you can also call them use cases. Okay, Uncle Bob calls it a use case. So these are your use cases. All right, so the application layer will depend on the domain layer. The domain layer doesn't depend on anything. So I want you to go to the application project dependencies, click and say add a project reference and add a domain. Okay, so for you to get all movies and show somebody who wants to rent, what do you need? Okay, so we're going to bring in a few classes. We're going to start bringing in an interface. Let's call it an iMovie repository. All right. So this repository will be concerned with your data access. All right. Unlike the traditional way of building software, whereby you have the repository pattern where you have the implementation plus the interface in one project, in this case, we're not going to have that. And I'll explain why. So let's say for you to see your movies, you have to go get movies somewhere, right? So let's say we have a public interfaces don't have any methods, don't have any access modifiers. So let's say it's going to return a list of movies. That would be your get all movies. Okay, right. So there will be other third-party things that we need to do. Things like getting a movie. You could talk to, let's say, an external third-party API. For instance, you want somebody to see the IMBD database and see the ratings. So those would be external calls. But the business logic, the application layer, will just have to state what is needed for you to do that. Okay. So the use case which we are doing in this video is getting all movies, right? Now the next question would be, this deals with data access, but it has not really taught us how to implement that, right? So this is just where you get the data. How do you define a use case? In that case, for you to define a use case, you're going to bring in another interface. You're going to call it an iMovie interface. So add an interface, add new item. It should be an interface, iMovie service. Okay. So the iMovie service will dictate the logic that's needed in this application. So what's the logic that we want? It's going to let you know that we want to, it's going to get a list of our movies. So it could have methods like get list of movies, search for a movie, tell the database that a movie has been borrowed. It must get out of the borrowed movies, which we're going to implement in the next video. So get all movies, right? All right, so the iService is dictating, and I'm going to put a comment here. This is a use case, right? That has to take place within this application. Okay. I know you're saying there's a movie repository that has get all movies, and I'm seeing a service that has get all movies. Are we not being redundant? No, I want you to understand that the service here will be responsible for defining the business case and also implementing how that business case will be done. Anything external to that will be pushed into another project, which we're going to do in a minute. All right. Okay. Now we have the iMovie service. It means we have to implement it in the application layer to show us how we intend to do that use case. So create a class, call it movie service. You're gonna go add class movie service, make the public, and it has to implement from the iMovie service. All right. So if it's not making sense where there are two, it's gonna make sense as we're winding up. All right, now you see. So this is a use case we've said. In the iMovie service, there'll be a use case to get all movies. How we get those movies, we're going to define. But where we get them, we don't really care. There'll be somebody else to worry about that. Unlike a traditional application whereby you do it within the same repository, all right? So for you to implement the movie service, what do you need to do? We need somebody to go get the data on our behalf, and that somebody is iMovie repository. You could have, if you're going to, let's say, another third-party API, you could use the same repository. But this repository will now go and fetch the data for us, which we need to facilitate our business case, right? All right, so who do we use? It's simple. Then for us to have that movie, we need to, so we depend on this repository, all right? And for those who don't understand what dependency injection is, I've got a good series. It's in the description below. Click on it, but you could follow along because I'm going to explain what a dependency is. So a dependency is something that something depends on to do its function. So your movie service here depends on the iMovie repository to do its service. Okay. So to avoid using a class within a class, we use an interface to bring an abstraction. Because if you bring a class within a class, then that's a tight dependency. Hence, we're using that interface, all right? So it means for you to use that interface, you have to bring it in. So we're going to use what we call constructor dependency injection, whereby we're going to inject those dependencies in the constructor, so that whoever is using that class can actually know. Okay, constructor dependency injection. All right, so you're going to bring on a constructor, ctor. All right, so this is a code snippet which just gives you a constructor, ctor. All right, and you're going to give it the dependency it relies on, which is the iMovie repository. Right, and movie repository, and you're going to new up that instance. And that's not what I want. Okay, and you're going to go to the movie repository, click control dot, and I want you to say create and assign a field with a small letter movie repository. Right, there you go. But I prefer using underscores, and I think I have to set that up in my Visual Studio. Okay, all right, beautiful. All right, so our dependency has been defined. All right, so it means for you to get all movies, all you need to say is var movies is equal to movie repository dot get all movies. All right, then you can return those movies. Okay, so I want you to look at this closely. We have one use case, which is to get all movies, and iMovie service has said that's the use case, and iMovie service class has implemented that use case. But instead of the movie service going itself to the database to fetch that data, it has just delegated an interface to do that on its behalf. So our use case here has been implemented, but how we're getting the data, we don't know and we do not care. And that's where the clean architecture paradigm comes into its full force here, because we're saying at the domain layer we're going to specify what models are important. So there could be models, there could be error handling, which we're going to add in future. There will be things like value objects and whatnot, which are common to the problem. And then a layer above, we're going to have an application layer, which will now dictate what those use cases are. And once it dictates, it is going to implement them. But for the intricacies, which are external systems, it does not care. It will just dictate. So whoever implements that interface is going to give us what we need. All right? Beautiful. Now, we're going to add the third project. So like click add project, it's going to be another class library. And this is going to be called cleanmovie.infrastructure. Cleanmovie.infrastructure. Okay, so the concept here is simple. You want the domain to be independent of anything, so that you can remove the domain and put it into another application. All right. Okay, so what happens in the infrastructure? I'm going to remove the class. So what happens in the infrastructure now? In the infrastructure is now where we're doing the actual operations. Those could be talking to a database, talking to another API, which we're going to see in this series, talking to the system clock. You could talk to the file system. Anything external to your domain will be done in the infrastructure. I know you might ask, is getting data external from the domain? Yes, it is. The domain will simply say, do this, log in, apply for a movie. That's what the domain will state. But how you implement those, some things will be external, and those things are going to fall automatically into the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is going to talk to an actual data store that you have. Okay, so I want you to open the infrastructure class, and I want you to implement an interface. So our application is dictating that there has to be an iMovie repository somewhere. So I want you to create a class called movie repository. But before you do that, remember that the domain doesn't depend on anything. The application depends on the domain. The infrastructure depends on the application. So the domain only talks to the application, right? The rest could talk via transient dependencies, which could be a topic for another day. So go to the infrastructure, dependencies, click add project reference and choose the application. And click OK. And I want you to create a class there, call it movie repository. All right, and make sure that movie repository now inherits from iMovie repository. All right, and then bring that in, and it will need to do something. Okay, so in this video we just want to see what the clean architecture is, not really data access. I'll do entity framework in the next video. Okay, so we're gonna have a list that public static that is going to hold this, that's going to hold the movies, right? But in the next session we're going to bring all that in. Okay, so I'm taking it one step at a time. Okay, so for beginners you can go on. For those who are slightly advanced, you're going to bear with me as we're trying to help everybody here. So the ID is going to be 1. The name of the movie is going to be what? Passion of Christ. And the cost to borrow it is going to be $2. Yeah, we just have 2 movies. 2 movies. And we could have Home Alone 4. It's gonna cost $1. I did 2. All right, so infrastructure will now be responsible for how data is retrieved, how data is done, and whatnot, right? All right, so infrastructure will now find a way to serve the needs of the application. So here all we're going to do is simple. We're just going to return movies. All right, so infrastructure is now responsible for the actual external implementation. All right, I'm having fun. I don't know about you. Now we're going to need to have a 4th project, and this will be what we call the presentation layer. All right, so I'd click on solution, add project, and then in this project we're going to bring in the ASP.NET Web API. This could be a web API, it could be a Blazor application, which we're going to try them all out. It could be a WPF application, it could even be, well, .NET MAUI, but we're going to use the web API. Okay, so we're going to call this clean movie.api. All right, and let's create. So the layer of the presentation, and these are things that you see, and this layer will depend on the application layer. Infrastructure only depends on the application. The presentation will depend on the application. All right, so here we are. It comes out of the box with the focus class, so you're going to delete that. Go to the controller, you're going to delete the focus as well. All right, so if you have never used the API project, I've got a great course, a video, check it out. I'll put it in the description so that you can also get in depth, but this should suffice. This should be enough for you to really understand what's going on. All right, so what we're saying, the application is going to depend on, the API is going to depend on the application. All right, project reference will depend on the application. Okay, there we go. So let's create a movie controller. So controller under common is API, so read writes, but I'll delete most of it and call this one a movies controller. A movies controller, and click add. And all we need is the get over there, so we could actually remove all of this. Perfect. This is the most interesting part, because usually if you've watched my API tutorials, or most which you find online, you'd see that in the controller is where you call the repository to go fetch you the data. But with clean architecture, we see that that's handled by the infrastructure. and the presentation layer of the API is in no way linked to the infrastructure. So it means we have to go to the application, and instead of using the repository, we're going to use the service, which the application, the movie service. And the movie service dictates a business logic. So for you to invoke that business logic via the API, then it has to go to the application layer, and as it implements the use case, it's going to say that, okay, I need help using the infrastructure. So it will do the calling on its own. All right. So that's the dependency that we have with the controller. It doesn't depend on the repository in this case, it depends on the iMovie service. So again, you're going to bring in your constructor there, and you're going to bring in the iMovie service. All right, iMovie service, call it service, and control dot so that you can assign, but like I said, I would like to put an underscore. All right, there you go. And to use API, we could just return an action result. An action result. We're going to have a list of movies. List of movies, like so. All right. And what am I returning? I just want to return an OK. We seem to be complaining. We need one over there. Then here you could say var movies from service. You could put application is equal to service dot service dot get all movies. All right, and here we're going to return OK and movies from service. Okay. So I'm going to set the API as a startup project. But if you're keen until now, you will realize that what is that? And at this juncture, let's try it out. So you're gonna press Control F5. All right, so here we are. If I say get all movies, click get, try it out and execute, and our movies actually do come. Well, congratulations. If you made it this far, then you've built your first ever clean architecture template. Subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss a video on how to extend your clean architecture template. And for more, check out my playlist on how to create a minimal API and building an API from scratch. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.